Well, hello everyone. So today we're going to do something different. We're going to listen to a piece of news report first. I think it came out in the year of 2012. Okay, so just 1 second. I'm going to play a podcast.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Melissa Block.
And I'm Robert Siegel. Summer is over, but in parts of the U.S., the drought is not. Recent rains have helped. Still, the federal government classifies more than a fifth of the country as being in extreme or exceptional drought. In parts of the lower Midwest, water-starved crops have collapsed. The cost of feed has jumped. But as Frank Morris of member station KCUR explains, farmers aren't faring as badly as you might expect.
Okay, I'm going to jump to the middle of the part. Just 1 second.
Less than half the normal yield. Pretty typical, though, across the lower Midwest, where the drought torched billions of bushels of corn. Yet, Jason Henderson with the Federal Reserve says farmers as a whole are doing well.
Here in 2012, USDA expects net farm incomes to reach their second highest level on record.
Record drought and near record farm income?
It seems completely illogical.
Dave Swenson teaches economics at Iowa State University. He says the explanation has several parts. For one,
crop prices, grain prices, oilseed prices, wheat prices are very, very high.
So from this podcast, we know that in 2012, there was a big drought. So in some parts of the lower Midwest in the United States, the water-starved crop have completely collapsed. And normally we would think that farmers' income would likely to fall on a great scale. But in fact, they were making very good money that year. So this is something very puzzling. But interestingly, this can all be explained by economics and price elasticity of demand that you have just learned. So usually many primary commodities, they have lower Pd values compared with the Pd value of manufactured products. So how we usually categorize these goods depends on what kind of factor of production that they're arising directly from. So for primary commodities, they come from natural resources or the land as one of their factors of production. So some of the types of goods that you can maybe think of are oil, coal, minerals, and agricultural products or food. And in this podcast, crops are considered as primary commodities. So now let's shift our attention to manufactured products. These are defined as goods produced by labor, usually working together with capital and raw materials. So some of the examples are like your iPods, your iPads, air conditioners, and cars. And when we go back to what we have learned in our previous lectures and recall what are some of the major determinants of Pd value. So the first thing, the number of substitutes, and secondly, whether the goods are necessities or luxuries are two of the major factors that we usually consider. And we'll be able to guess the Pd value for primary commodities have a relatively low value since they are necessities and have no substitutes. So in contrast, manufactured products has relatively high value since they usually have substitutes. So one of the major questions that people usually have is why food has little substitutes. Because, for instance, when I go to Whole Foods or Trader Joe's with my mom on weekends, I can in fact see, for instance, so many watermelons produced by different farms. And they all look the same to me, even though my mom usually knows which one is sweeter. But at least to me, it seems that watermelon has many substitutes. So one important thing I want to point out here is that a key factor that will affect the number of substitutes is whether a term or the good is defined in a broad or a narrow way. So this comparison is actually relative. So for instance, fruit is a broader definition than specific types of fruits like watermelon and blueberries. But food, in comparison with fruit, is defined even broader. So narrower the definition, the greater number of substitutes that it has. So food and crops in developed countries have very low Pd value, ranges typically from 0.2 to 0.25. So when we're comparing the demand curve of manufactured good and primary commodities, it looks something like this. We usually use the relative steepness of the curve to be an indication of the Pd value. This is defined based on the assumption that they're drawn on the same diagram and crossed at the same point. If I do it on a different scale, for example like this, if I draw two identical demand curves with different scales on the axis that represents quantity demanded, then it would be wrong to say the flatter the curve, the greater elastic demand it is. So unless you put them on the same scale or the same diagram, then the comparison can be fair. So now let's think about a question together. So which demand curve represents crops? It is the steeper demand curve, right? So the one that marks in red. And why? Because, for instance, if I change my price level from P1 to P2, we'll see the quantity demanded for D1 is more responsive and D2 is less responsive. So D2 is more inelastic. And it looks like that we'll be able to know it is the demand curve for farmers' crops. So in the news, it said that there was a drought, so bad weather is a supply shifter, and we shift the curve rather than moving along the curve. So if you want to know the distinction between these two concepts in detail, I encourage you to go back to my video playlist on Chapter 2. So for the timing purposes, I'll keep going. So there's a leftward shift on the diagram. So when there is a decrease in supply, price for a manufactured good increase from here to here, and the price for crops increase from this point to this point. So I can come to my conclusion that a shift in supply results in larger price fluctuations when my demand is more inelastic over short periods of time. So the price volatility is high, or in another name, it is quite unstable. But still, we haven't talked about the reasons why farmers in the news receive high revenue when they experience a poor crop season. So this is actually pretty easy if you use the intuition. So for total revenue, for these farmers will increase because crops are primary goods. Therefore, they are inelastic, meaning the percentage increase in price is larger than the percentage decrease in quantity. So the effect of increase in price is greater than the loss in quantity demanded. So there will be an increase in my final total revenue. So let's see how it shows on a diagram. It might be more obvious if I show you that way. So initially, my total revenue is equals to A plus B. And as my price changes or increases, my quantity demanded decreases, right? So my new total revenue is equals to A plus C, and B is the loss region, C is the gain part. And as you can see, the area of C is greater than B. And we can see that the loss area is relatively smaller. And these points then lead to some similarly logical results that poor crops and weather in agriculture actually increase farmers' revenues, even though the drought destroys a substantial portion of this season's crop. So this is our story for today. If you like the video, please subscribe my channel and leave a comment down below. Okay, I hope to see you next time.